labor organizing, and the current state of affairs. We are coming to you live from Concordia University's fourth space, located on unceded Indigenous lands in Tiohtià:ke, Montreal. As caretakers for the lands and waters we are meeting on, we are grateful to the Kanien'kehá:ka Nation for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At Fourth Space, we work to connect people to the initiatives, research projects, and dialogues happening across the university, so we are pleased to have the opportunity to collaborate with Hojo Concordia and the CSU, who organized this event to examine the state of workers' rights locally and beyond. We are running this as a workshop, so we welcome your comments via the Q&A. It's now my pleasure to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Keone.
Thank you. It's on? Okay. I'm Adia. I'm a Hojo assistant. We organized this event to help students who are interested in workers' rights and wanted to learn more about the current state of affairs of labor in Montreal and the rest of the world. At Hojo, we help students find housing and jobs while also giving out legal information to tenants and workers. And I think I can pass it on to our panelists. Jonathan, if you want to introduce yourself really quickly, explain your organization, what you do, your position, and what your whole organization does.
Sure. So hi everybody, I'm Jonathan. I'm the outgoing vice president of TREC, which is the TA and RA union of Concordia. And we are the labor union for teaching assistants and research assistants at Concordia, and we help educate our members on their rights at work and enforce those rights and enforce the collective agreement that we have with Concordia. And yeah, that's the basics of it. Part of the other thing we do is that we help organize each department to get concessions from professors or reorganize the way work works in those departments.
Great, thank you. Mustafa?
So my name is Mustafa Hanawi, and I'm a longtime community organizer at the Immigrant Workers Center, which was founded in 2000, which seeks to organize with precarious migrant and immigrant workers, from warehousing to domestic work to agricultural workers to those who are undocumented, those who are here as permanent residents, and those under the temporary foreign worker program. And also I'm a PhD candidate at Concordia in geography, and my focus has been on Amazon, and I recently worked at Amazon and wrote about those experiences for The Breach and a few other publications, and so, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Sophie, if you want to go next.
Yes, hi, I'm Sophie. I'm a freelance translator and I'm an organizer as well with SATAC. That acronym stands for Syndicat Associatif des Travailleurs Travailleuses Autonomes du Québec. It's a mouthful, but it means we're Quebec's freelancers union. SATAC is a pretty new organizing project. It was created back in 2017, I believe. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah, to sort of help with the isolation that a lot of freelancers were feeling, to build community, to build solidarity among freelance workers, but also to improve our working conditions across industries. So wherever independent contractors, freelancers, et cetera, self-employed people are, we're happy to go and we're happy to talk to people and yeah, try and improve our working lives and our lives generally together.
Great. And Jonathan is also a member of SATAC. I don't know if that was said, but all right, I guess we can get into questions now. If anyone has questions from the Zoom or in person that you want to ask, you can raise your hands. We'll definitely have a Q&A section later, so if you put a question in Zoom, we'll try to get to it. So first we're going to be talking about current affairs. As you guys know, Starbucks and Amazon has had a unionization wave. A lot of the information put out in the news media has been surrounding the union busting tactics of Amazon and Starbucks as an organization. Do you guys have a reaction to their tactics? Like, do you think they're common tactics done by large employers, or do you know of any different tactics that they have used that have been like especially inappropriate? Our Amazon expert.
I'll talk about Amazon specifically because it's something I'm more well aware about. So, I mean, I think prior to what happened at JFK 8, which was the large Amazon facility in Staten Island, that was the first unionized warehouse in North America, or at least to have a recognized vote. There's still no collective agreement between the Amazon labor union and Amazon itself, but as the first, warehouse or fulfillment center to actually to vote yes for a union. I mean, Amazon's tactics are both unique and but also part of the same parcel of tactics, right? So a lot of these large corporations, when they try to bust a union, I mean, Amazon is different before. So if you look at not what Amazon did in terms of hiring consultants, right? So I think it was in 2021, Amazon spent $4 million in consultants to bust the union in Staten Island, and it was a massive figure, right? And so, but if you look at Amazon's model before the vote in Staten Island, is that Amazon was sensitive to pressure, right? So a lot of the employers, the playbook was pretty simple, right? Before Amazon and sort of before even e-commerce, right? So if you look at Couche-Tard here in Quebec, right? So Couche-Tard, they tried to unionize, and Couche-Tard just said, okay, fine, we'll shut down, right? They just closed the Couche-Tards that were gonna have votes. Or what Walmart did outside of Montreal as well, right? When UFCW had a successful vote, Walmart said, we're so committed to not having a union, we're just gonna shut down, right? That was it. And so the idea was that either you can scare workers into not voting for a union by shutting down the workplace or saying that you're gonna move your workplace abroad, but you can't move a coffee shop abroad, right? You can't move a fulfillment center abroad, right? They can't do that. They're trapped, right? And they're trapped by their own logic, right? So for Amazon, they can't just shuttle around because, you can't do Amazon Prime, or in the US, Amazon, same day Prime, right? So you can order in the morning and get it in the afternoon. The further away you are from those large cities, right? So they're stuck, and that's the big problem. And the common Amazon playbook before this was pretty simple, was that you give workers a lot of benefits, you coax them into to being part of the workforce, right? So, I mean, in comparison to other workplaces, Amazon would give, medical, dental. In the US, they get parental leave of 20 weeks paid. And in the US, that's unheard of, right? Even if you're a white collar worker, that's unheard of. So it's significant. It doesn't sound a lot here, but I would see pictures of Amazon workers draping their babies in their safety vests, thanking Jeff Bezos because of parental leave, right? So I think that's one of the biggest challenges everyone, because we think of Amazon as being sheer evil, and it is, right? It's changed a lot of things that obviously we'll get into at some point, but for workers, those are significant. But Amazon knows that they're not going to use it, right? It's like this dangling carrot, because the work is so bad that most people leave before they even use any of these benefits that Amazon supposedly gives them, right? And that workers are entitled to, and that you're not entitled to if you're a temp, an internal temp, a white badge. You only get it once you're a blue badge, considered a permanent Amazonian. But the thing that Amazon, beyond this, that tried to do was, they would have these one-on-one meetings, sort of they'd bring in these what they call ambassadors, like that come down from like some other fulfillment center and then try to convince people to not join the union. In Edmonton, we saw that they just raised the number of workers. So they put in all of these, they made these new hires of white badges so that no way that the union would be able to meet the threshold for a vote. But Amazon is also unique in the sense that Amazon didn't fire a lot of the, I mean, they fired some of the people active, and in other workplace campaigns, they don't fire the worker leaders. So in the sense that Amazon's tactics are both, I think, new and old, and I think they rely a lot on these consulting firms. And I think these consulting firms, there was just an article recently, are a bit dumbfounded. They're struck. Why do workers want unions again? Right? Like they thought the issue was done and done, but they actually can't deal with it. There's something bigger going on, right? And that they can't comprehend. So a lot of their tactics are becoming a lot more useless because ideologically there's no strength to them anymore.
Yeah, definitely. I know that we saw the delivery drivers in Ontario who tried to organize and successfully organize, and their departments just got shut down. And they were considered like subsidiaries to Amazon with like the same rules, the same logic, everything like an Amazon driver, but they're not an Amazon driver. Do you think that it was easier for them to union bust in that kind of scenario where they're not directly hired by Amazon?
I mean, definitely, because then they just pick up a new subcontracting firm, right? I mean, that's, and so when you're like when you're a temp, or you're a gig worker, or you're subcontracted, you always feel even more sense of insecurity, right? So you feel that sense of insecurity in front of the law. You do feel like you don't have access to the same rights. And so there's always this, it makes it a lot harder for them to want to join a union, but also then a lot easier for the employers to just, totally get rid of it and find a new subcontractor, right? And so this is a big part of Amazon's delivery network, right? Is this fake subcontracting, and it's universal across Amazon.
Yeah, definitely. Does anyone else have any inputs?
I can mention one thing about that, and it's related to Stack instead of Track.
Yeah.
But like what Mustafa was describing is the whole the fact of being a temp worker. One thing that large companies tend to do is just pretend you're not an employee. So instead of actually saying you work here and you will keep working here next month, they'll just keep giving you a 3-month contract or something like that. And like Sophie could speak to this a bit more, but one of the things SATAC had to do was try to organize people to recognize that they were in fact employees and deserved far more benefits than they had before. Sophie, if you want to.
Yeah, absolutely. Mustafa, you were saying earlier, you were talking about gig workers, feeling like they're not necessarily protected under the law in the way that an employee would be. And I would say in Quebec, anyways, they aren't. It's like it's more than a feeling or a lack of knowledge from people. By and large, under Quebec labor law, freelancers are sort of a non-class, right? We don't. It's almost as though we don't really exist as far as the law is concerned. And I say freelancers, but as Jonathan was saying, there is this huge gray area, right, where companies, as our economy is getting increasingly gigified, will try and often succeed in getting away with misclassifying employees, people who in effect are employees, as freelancers, as contract workers, as self-employed. There's a number of terms that companies will use to sort of sell this idea to workers that they benefit from this increased level of flexibility in their work, and they're independent, and it sort of cultivates this idea that the client, which in this case we would call an employer, really, if we're being honest, but that the employer and the the employer slash client and the employee slash contractor have this sort of relationship where they can negotiate as equals, where they're just choosing to partner up. And that sort of obscures the fact that in a lot of cases, and we can get into that a bit later into the sort of nitty-gritty of what makes an employee inside and outside the law, but what that creates is a situation where people are very much at the mercy of their employer, in some cases with much, much worse working conditions than an employee would have, but they don't have any of the recourse that the law affords employees. They can't, for example, file a claim with the Commission des normes du travail in Quebec. I'm less familiar with the details of this in other provinces, but it is a phenomenon that is absolutely just sweeping the country, the continent. And it's, yeah, oftentimes the challenge, as Jonathan was saying, is just getting these workers to the point where they realize, like, oh shit, like I've been misclassified, I've been lied to by this employer, and then what do we do after that, right? Do we try to get them sort of reclassified as a worker so that they can have these legal protections? And it, you know, with regards to a number of things, including wages and wage theft and harassment and all sorts of other things. Or do we go a different route? And, you know, on a more macro level, how do we change the law, right? Is that something that a union can do? There are a number of people within SATAC who absolutely think that it is something a union can do. And I know you're not here on behalf of SATAC, Jonathan, but you could speak to that as well. But there are a number of avenues, both on the sort of micro, like individual worker level, and the more macro kind of law, legal system, labor law system, things that can be done.
Definitely. So moving on, so Gallup data from 2021 says that 77% of young people from the age group of 18 to 34 approve of unions. A lot of younger workforces are seeing union victories, and it's like a huge wave with Starbucks specifically. A lot of their main organizers are like 20, which is amazing because it shows how active the youth is. So what are your thoughts on this? Is union/labor activity, in your experience, more common in younger age demographics? Or if you've been working in labor a long time, do you think this is a new phenomenon? Someone want to jump in quick? Yeah, you can.
Yeah, so I mean, for me, like, I'm at a weird age. I'm like 35, so I'm right between the people who like joined a union by default because that's like what those jobs were, and then there's the people who come like right after me who are like seeing, oh yeah, labor organizing is cool again. Personally, I worked in the entertainment industry before becoming a TA, and it's kind of funny because the reason I'm a TA is because my workplace didn't have a union and just fired everybody at the beginning of COVID. But yeah, I mean, it's really encouraging, and I think a lot of this is not exactly new, but things are different. Like a lot of the labor organizing is coming from the retail and service sector, which basically unions were like, we're not dealing with this. It's too difficult. People don't stick around long enough. Like that's I think was if I could speak to this a bit more, but like one of the things I know about with Amazon was that the reason it was so hard to get like Amazon labor union started up, and before that the Bessemer drive didn't work out, was because there's the churn. People just keep leaving. Like that's how Amazon was able to just be like, all right, whatever, you can try your union thing. We're not gonna let you get it because people keep leaving. Like nowadays, it's becoming increasingly clear that like you're not really friends with your employer, no matter how much they try to push it. I know Starbucks and Amazon both try to push, we're a big family. It's all great here. You want to be here. And it's like, yeah, it's like people are seeing through that a lot more. Like those aren't covering rent, for example.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
like I think that's part of like why more people are seeing it, because like yeah, I don't want to say generation, but like people around my age were kind of pushed into work being like you can just be your own guy, you can get money if you get into the right job, and that's not true. So like yeah, and I mean I worked at a company that did pay well, but it was like you're all going to burn out eventually from overwork. So even then, when you're paid well, you do still probably need union benefits because you're going to be protected from burning out in that case.
Yeah, and definitely just having a resource that will bring an issue up to your employer is always a good thing, especially when you're talking about overwork. Like if you're feeling overworked and you're not unionized, where do you go?
Yeah, well,
To a
usually you
supervisor?
go to HR, say,
Yeah.
I'm starting to feel depressed and I'm not sure why. I think it has nothing to do with how many hours I've done for the
Yeah.
last 3 weeks. And
Yeah.
the HR person will be like, oh, I can't do anything about that. So, yeah.
Someone else?
So I think in terms of the like that there's this sort of generational shift. I think there's like a monumental shift too, right? In that if you think about what happened during the pandemic and after the pandemic as well, I think it really changed things, right? That workers were literally dying so that employers can keep their profit. And I think people came to realize that, I mean, which was visceral, I think, obviously for a lot of workers, but that no one, that their health and safety, that their lives came second, right, to the bottom line of a lot of these companies. And so I think as a result of that, that anger, and that also that there was this because it was something that could be seen every day, right? That people, even in when retail was open or when parts of the service sector were open, and who got to stay at home and who didn't have to stay at home. And this is where you're seeing people organize, right? It's in the Starbucks, it's in the Amazons, um, it's in the chapters Indigo, which is also a big, unionizing wave in Canada. uh, this is where you're beginning to see a lot of that organizing taking place. And they, at the same time, they saw their employers' profits just shoot through the roof, right? And I mean, I think that's a big part of it. And this idea that, that I think our generation, unfortunately, was not bought the Kool-Aid, was that, that like the idea that if you work hard enough and you follow the straight and narrow, that eventually you'll succeed. And that's actually not been the case. And in fact, working people are paying with their lives during the pandemic. So I think that led. I mean, I think that's a big part of why we're seeing this. This both a strike wave and an organizing wave that hasn't happened before, and that people are resentful that there's this sort of entrenched. And I think people are beginning to realize more that that the game is a bit rigged, right? That this idea, not only will you be successful if you work, but that also that sort of the ideology of neoliberalism and globalization is that, sort of the self-made person or the entrepreneur has also become a lie, right? Like people are looking at families that control big parts of our lives. And if you look at the Westons or the Irvings, or you look at the fact that 4 companies control 70% of our food, right? In Canada, right? In food distribution, right?
Yeah.
So I think young people, are seeking something different. I think it's also about bigger politics too, right? That no parties show them an alternative. So, but they want to organize, right? And they're doing that in their workplaces. And uh, I think that's a big part of the excitement. And I think we've seen it, at the center, and now we've seen it here in Montreal, right? You have the formation of the Montreal Amazon Workers Union, right, of MAU, and it's actually workers who approached CSN, and they've become fed up with the way it works. And then also, you know, in other warehouses like Dollarama, workers have stood up. So you're beginning to see this really kind of, I wouldn't say knee jerk, but I think there is a bigger shift on the ground that you can actually, that you can feel tangibly.
Definitely, definitely. Sophie, do you have something you want to add?
Yeah, I would just say I think this shift can also be seen in the sort of freelance or self-employed world. I'm 30. I was when I was in university to learn translation 5, 6 years ago. A lot of us were we already knew that we wanted to be freelancers, and there was this interesting tension between these two ways to view freelancing, right? Where on the one hand you had people who thought of themselves as I'm not going to say what's the American saying, a temporarily embarrassed millionaire or something like that. Like I had some people who went to school with me who I would say that they saw themselves as temporarily embarrassed business people, where whether it was, you know, that eventually they wanted to launch their own firm and own a company, or just more this idea that, you know, you're going to be a you're going to be a boss lady, right? You're going to be a one-woman business or a one-person business. And I say woman because there's lots and lots of women in translation. But this idea, right, that you're going to have to, if you're going to be a freelancer, you have to run your life like you would run a business, right? And I remember being very alienated by that, being an angry leftist in university, but that was very much kind of how things were taught to us, right? The little bits of our formal education as undergrad translation students, and I know this is very, very specific to my field, but I think it applies to other industries as well, was, well, if you're going to be a freelancer, you have to be a business person. And that's a very, very different narrative than what I think my fellow workers and I as SATAC tend to favor, which is this idea that, well, we're workers, right? If we're not employing other people, if we're not exploiting the labor of other folks, at the core of it, we are workers, right? The ways in which we make our money, the ways in which we interact with the people buying our time are different, but in the end, we stand in solidarity with all our fellow workers, whether employed by others or self-employed. And it, for me, like, I see it as this strong desire to keep at the forefront the power dynamics that are always at play when in the context of a working relationship, right? Whether you're an employee, whether you're not. Yeah, there are always power dynamics at play. There is always a potential for exploitation and for abuse. And yeah, it's sort of on a different tangent than what you two were talking about, but I think it speaks to a desire among workers, and perhaps among younger workers even more so, to think of themselves as in solidarity with each other, and as workers who are able to struggle together for a better future. And I think this, I'm no expert in this, but I would assume that there is also something to do with, you know, our impending environmental doom, right? I think that there is both short and long term this general sense that we don't actually have that much left to lose, right? And if we don't get organized now, and if we don't start working together now to better our working conditions, nobody's going to do it for us, and it's only going to get worse. I'm sorry, that's very, very sad. I'm so sorry.
So I just want to jump in as a member of the younger community. I'm 22, so a lot of my friends graduated during COVID, and they've seen people who graduated a little bit before them get laid off from the jobs that they just started due to like the pandemic early on. And now we see a wave of a war on talent kind of rhetoric coming out from big companies, where they're wanting to hire a lot of people, but certain employees want to, you know, school again or went to other industries. So they're trying to hire now, and they're in a hiring wave. How do you think this affects younger workers? How do you think this has affected the move to organize and form unions, and like even individually want better from the workplace that you're getting into, whether that's increases in the wage and not just having minimum wage, or increases in benefits? Whoever wants to go first.
Go first. I
Okay.
mean, I did mention I was laid off at the beginning of the
Yeah.
pandemic also.
Great.
So, like, yeah, I mean, like, this is employers trying to have it both ways, where they're both like, ah, our revenues, please go away. Oh no, our revenues, please come back. Like, and so, like, it is a weird thing. I mean, this also ties into like this whole rhetoric of like we can't have enough workers, but we want specific workers. We don't want to pay for this, but we want to pay for that. Like, it ties into a lot of things that have to do with immigration as well, because like you have workers who are like literally score all the points on the immigration card, come in, and then like the businesses that want them are like, no, we got those guys here, so it's fine. Glad you could make it. Have fun. But like I think a lot of it has to do with like what so I was saying before. Like, we're seeing that the narratives that we've been given about things are just not true. Like, employers are being like, we get to control whether you have rent or not, and that's what this relationship is. And if you want things from us, we're not going to give it to you. So you need somebody, you need some way of like actually asking for these things so you can set what you want. And also, I mean, I think like I think another part of it is like the one of the things that unions do for workers is make things transparent. Like, in TRAC's case, we tell you how much you're supposed to get paid. Like, we know how much you get paid. You, like, all members of our union know how much we're supposed to get paid, if they know we exist. And then then also Concordia knows how much people are supposed to get paid. We all agree on this. That's what a collective agreement is for. But like in the normal private sector, you'll have your boss who's walking around to each different person being like, I'm going to pay you this much. I'm going to pay this person much more. I'm not going to pay that other person anything because they work hard by default. And it's like, and all of that like breaks worker solidarity for all intents and purposes. It makes it harder for people to get along with each other. It creates narratives about lazy workers when that's like not true. It's the employer basically trying to set you up against each other. And like, yeah, all of that stuff that I mentioned that like TRAC does by default by having like the pay just stated is stuff that like would benefit younger workers, because like one of the things that happens, like, I worked in entertainment, which is one of those places where lots of young workers go in, they're all like, I'm so happy to be here, it's great, and then your boss repeats after you that you are happy to be here, it's great, keep working for free. So like like that's what a union can do for you, and it's like what's happening in a lot of game companies now, where people are like, okay, I came here to have fun because I thought entertainment would be fun, and it turns out I'm working 60 hours a week, and I'd rather not. So like recently, Activision, I mean, even though they make Call of Duty, which is a game, but their game testers recently unionized. They want to vote for it, and like that's huge, because like it's also pointing out that even in these industries which are supposed to be fun, you have people who are like, yeah, no, this is actually work. I'm using this to pay for my life.
Yeah.
So we need an arrangement here. I'm gonna stop ranting.
Mustafa, do you want to jump in?
In terms of the question about, particularly now in terms of this idea like of a tight labor market, or I think it has like massive effects on labor and capital, or employers, they know this, right? And that it's like a fundamental, it's a problem, right? And you see it across the board, right? For Amazon, it was massive, right? Like they'd outstripped their capacity, and they were actually facing like a real worker shortage, right? They couldn't absorb enough labor to fulfill the demand at a certain point, right? But it's funny the way employers always think about things. Like it wasn't that, so if in the U.S., for example, Amazon has a 150% turnover rate, right, annually. So it means that 1 out of 30 Americans either have worked or work for Amazon. So you can think about the entire country as being one giant company town, the U.S. And the problem for Amazon wasn't like, oh yeah, let's just stop being jerks and let's lower the quotas and people will want to leave less. We'll have better retention. But for Amazon, that's out of the question, right? That's what was incredible. That for Amazon, let's, and maybe workers will be happier. That's not the question, right? Because for them, prime delivery or fast delivery comes first and foremost over everything, right? Even over profit, right? So Amazon, this quarter reported its first loss. And the reason why, because it was spending so much on workers and labor and new facilities. But the problem was that even for them, all of these benefits and all of these carrots that dangle in front of workers, for them, it's not a question of profit, but it's simply to ensure that they control the market, right? But workers know and workers get a sense when they have some sense of control, when there is this tight labor market, right? So, a lot of examples from even the Immigrant Worker Center that aren't Amazon, we were working with, I was working with a worker who was working at Cook It, and she got fired, and she was just like, yeah, I went to Ollie Mill, they were starting at 17, and then I went to another company, and then they were starting at 20. Workers get a sense that they have a degree of power, individually at least now, right? And it's rational because they see this, because employers look desperate, right? Employers actually look weak, right? It's like, you need me, I don't need you. But which is always the case, right? I mean, that's the unfortunate reality, right? That, the idea that, somehow in our economic system that employers are the ones endowed with all of the ingenuity and deserve the rewards from everything that working people actually create, when it's clear in this situation that it's actually workers that are creating all of the wealth, right? And that employers are scared that workers are getting to understand that fact, right? And so, and so you actually see this, so in a place like Dollarama and its warehouses, which employ something like 1,000 workers, all of them are temp agency workers, but the situation is so desperate. I mean, workers, I was telling this to people before, is that I think they might make as much as RAs, right? That, at Dollarama's warehouse, if workers are starting at $20 an hour, that's pretty close to some grad student jobs, right? And I'm not saying that's bad. All labor should be valued and all work should be decent, but that was never the case, right? It was always a minimum wage job. And it's because they're so desperate to make that profit that they don't want to actually cut down on quotas or make the workplace better, that they're willing to spend on wages as a hopes to win over workers, and to stop them from, leaving the workplace. So, I mean, it's clear that there's a rationality that workers understand when they're in a situation of full employment, even historically, right? If you look at, which was also tied to the pandemic, if you actually look at, the last and the only time that there was a general strike in this, in Canada, in Winnipeg in 1919, there's no coincidence. It was after, the Spanish flu, right? And that strike was directly related to the organizing and what took place in the last great pandemic that we faced, right? And so there was a direct relation to that. And so, I mean, I think that, and how it translates into something better in terms of work conditions and in terms of more organizing is dependent on people who are active in labor, right? It's not, I don't think it's going to come from like some magic pill, right? But there is, for me, and I think there's like a window, right? Because they're always trying to figure out ways, and this ties directly to immigration, right? It's a double-edged sword, right? Because at some points, all of a sudden employers really want immigration, and then they want, okay, temporary foreign workers, okay, we can live with that. And then the right is like, well, we can't make them actual permanent residents. And then you still have a disposable population because no one's talking about regularizing the 500,000 people who are already here, but they don't have status, but they're already counted as being exploited because they have no choice but to work, right? And so the question of how do they get more labor, and they were used to having access to this sort of global pool of labor that no longer is shrinking and shrinking all the time. And then at the same time, it's these same parties that have such a racist base that they don't want to actually expand or reform immigration any further, right? So they're in this bind, and I think for us as activists, as organizers, we have to understand these windows sort of, they open and they close. We're not going to be in this kind of situation for a very long time. So, how do we get the most out of this moment, and how do we organize the most amount of people in this moment when people have a lot of leverage in the economy?
Definitely. Sophie, did you want to jump in?
Big yes. Yeah, I think, I mean, I don't have much to add other than one of the things that, again, on a very micro level that myself and some of my fellow organizers within SATAC try to do is to make that sort of sort of crisis that a lot of employers, a lot of businesses are going through more visible, because for workers who are, and I'm thinking of right now of the kinds of freelancers who work at home, right, and who don't, not only don't have a shop floor in common or an office in common, but they don't even have like a company server in common, right? They are, for all intents and purposes, unaware of each other's existence, right? We know that there are other freelancers working with the same clients, the same companies, but we're faceless, right? And so it becomes very, very difficult to discuss things like wages. Obviously, SATAC as a freelancers union can't quite take the same kinds of actions, right, as a union representing the employees of one company or all of the workers in one particular sector who have, a sense of time and place in common. And so I've had a lot of conversations personally with people who were just starting out, whether it be in translation or in other fields, and just talking to them about basic negotiating, right? Just the fact that they're allowed to negotiate with a client, the fact that even if the client is a company with a whole legal department and these pre-made contracts and these rates, which they say are immovable, right, are completely just set in stone and the same for everybody. They will lie about that all the time. That it is in fact possible to push back. It's difficult. It's difficult, especially if you're just one person against what feels like this huge machine. But it's possible, and it becomes more possible when we come together and we develop tools to keep each other sort of informed, right? So in some fields that has meant putting together these anonymous spreadsheets where people go and tell other freelancers how much they're getting paid by this one client. People have done this in journalism. People have done this in graphic design. We're looking into doing something similar for translation. So that's one part of it. And I would say, kind of going back to something that both of you alluded to, for the independent contractors, the self-employed workers who are in fact misclassified employees, I would say that there is this added challenge that there is almost this this built-in what's the opposite of longevity, right? They're not meant to stay for a long time, right? The assumption is, they're here for a contract, they're here for some unspecified period of time. They're not going to stick around. It's very hard to build solidarity in those conditions, right? It's hard, I think, for people to feel that they are connected to their fellow worker when they have no idea if they'll still be working at this place, next week or next month, or so we're up against that. And none of those are, all of those obstacles can be conquered or bypassed, or but yeah, I think it's this very, very interesting moment where people are both very, very fed up and a lot of people are very motivated to organize, but we are also living through a period in our economy that is in many ways designed to isolate us from each other and make us extremely precarious and sort of convince us of this logic of scarcity. So it's complicated.
Definitely. So on that note, within like that context of like a tight labor market, and the problems that we were discussing before with health and safety, the Amazon labor union successfully organized and voted yes to an independent union being formed, and making a contract with Amazon in Staten Island. How do you think students and people in the audience today could do similar things in their workplaces? Is there like a guide by organizers and activists that they should go into? Is there a specific resource that they could reach? What are your tips and tricks?
Oh, well, I mean, there's almost a guide. Like this is so. Sophie mentioned the Normes du Travail, CNEST. That's almost a guide, I'll say, because like they have a website. You can go on it. Chances are somebody is breaking one of the labor standards that exist if you're working somewhere. And if they're breaking it for you, they're probably breaking it for everyone. The other thing is, like the reason organizing freelancers is hard is because they probably don't talk to each other. But I mean, if you're all working in a workplace, it's very easy to talk to somebody else. That's like the beginning of organizing, is just talking to your coworkers, being like, hey, do you find it a little weird that our boss keeps telling us to stay a half hour after work or after closing or whatever, or mandatory fun or whatever? Like all of those things are like the easy start to thinking about what to organize. And I think another tip is finding out what like the big problem at your workplace is. The hard part about organizing formally, like, I mean, I'm in an actual like legally recognized labor union. That's what TRAC is. And once you get past the part where you're talking to people and trying to have everybody work out together to figure out what they want, you get into the weird legal area where people have very strict definitions of things. And at that point, like depending on where you're working or what you're doing, you may want to reach out to a large union. Like if you're working in food service, for example, there's like UFCW. I think right now SQDC is doing a lot of organizing, or some stores are doing a lot of organizing. If you see anybody in a costume, it's because they're trying to go on strike or doing some labor pushes. But yeah, I mean, I think like, yeah, the first step really is to know your rights and find out how much each of you knows about what rights you have. And even then, it's not necessary that like the things you want to change at work need to be something that's written in labor law. It might be some other problem in the workplace that like isn't properly codified in labor law. But even then, like if you all see it as a problem, then that's like a place to start talking about what the issues are. I mean, for TRAC, since we're all like TAs and RAs, so like some of the problems are labor law related problems, but other ones are like, how does this work with my professor? Because they're the one who gave me the job and I still want to graduate. Or like in other cases where it's just like, I don't know if this research contract works this way. Can you please help me? So like these are things that people tend to talk about to each other and to us to figure out like what to do to change things. And like beyond that, it's like talking to the department about how they assign work and stuff like that. So there's a lot of places to start, but like I think the easiest one is to just figure out what your rights are and figure out what other people are having trouble with in your place of work.
Anyone else want to jump in?
Yeah, I would say it's not so much a guide or a playbook, but I would say don't be afraid to start very, very small. As Jonathan said, it doesn't have to be something where your boss is going against the law. It might just be something that's not working for you. And if it's not working for you in your place of work, there's a high chance that it's not working for at least one of your coworkers, right? At SATAC, we very much subscribe to the idea that organizing it starts with 2 or more workers talking to each other about their working conditions. And I would say that getting a legally certified union is only one way to go about it. Freelancers can't, I'm sorry, my mic. Freelancers can't really formally organize under the law as a recognized union. That doesn't mean that we can't form our own kind of union, which is what SATAC is, where we look at things on a case-by-case basis. We have more long-term projects. We help each other out, whether it be with lost wages, people who face harassment at work. But it can also be on a much smaller scale. My friend Selena, who's one of the people who started SATAC and who's just a great organizer, has this story that she tells, which I'm probably going to butcher a bit, but I think that the gist of it is this, where she knows this translator who did some translation, who was used to doing some translation work for this client, and who knew that 2 other translators were also doing work for this client. And that client stops paying one day. The friend had a past due invoice, possibly several. And basically these 3 translators, knowing that they were the 3 translation service providers that the client used, coordinated together and agreed to not agree to take on new work as long as they weren't getting paid, because they realized that this was a problem that either they were all facing, or that 1 or 2 of them were facing, but that they were all likely to face at some point, and that presenting a united front, even in an ad hoc kind of fashion, can be very, very effective. And spoiler alert, the client ended up paying, because at the end of the day, as my co-panelists have said, the client, the employer, they need you, right? They need your labor. They wouldn't be talking to you, they wouldn't be giving you the time of day if they didn't need something from you. And so I think stories like that can be very inspiring as well, because it can be very, very daunting to think about unionizing a whole workplace, right? Or unionizing workers who are isolated from each other, who don't seem to have that much in common. Inevitably, as soon as you start talking to each other, you will find things in common, and you will find things about your workplace that could be made better. And those are the things to focus on. And if there's small things, if they're things that only matter to you and your coworkers, that's fine. That's fine, because if you apply enough pressure, if you strategize, and if you make it clear to your employer that these things are important to you, chances are they're going to have to listen. Doesn't mean they're going to grant it to you, but they're going to have to listen at some point. Yeah.
Definitely. Mustafa, did you want to jump in?
I mean, in terms of just going off what Sophie said, yeah, there's a plethora. I mean, it's not, I come from a tradition of worker centers, right, where we do accompaniment to the Labor Standards Commission. We fight for workers' basic rights. We deal with immigration-related issues. I mean, we organize collective campaigns, but they're around specific demands in a workplace, or let's say a sector. But I think the point is that we're acting and organizing as working people again, right? And that, I think, is kind of what's needed. Like, I think we have to be at the moment where it's not so much about having a union or not having a union. There's all kinds of models of organizing, but it's about rebuilding a culture again, or an idea again, that that sort of society is just, made up of, we're all gig workers. We're all micro entrepreneurs, and we're all sort of these free floating individuals. It's not how it works. And if we prepare, and the idea that I think to change that idea and that culture again is really an important thing. And I think, uh, so whatever forms of organizing allow us to do that is really important, right? And if you look at, Amazon, they went through a different route, right? What happened, the ALU was like completely, I think it shocked a lot of people because it was like, it was an independent union. They did it in a very different way, right? A lot of unions go secret, right? Like you're supposed to think of the workplace as like a mini dictatorship, right? And it's true, it is, right? They are, employers are dictators, right? They have a lot of power that you couldn't have outside of the workplace, right? In terms of surveillance and bullying and the ability to deprive you of a livelihood, like it's a lot of power and that people. And I think one of the things that's really important what happened to ALU was that they organized out in the open for 10 months. They just were consistent. They tabled every day, no resources, barely any money, right? And they were having fun with it, right? Like giving out fried rice and empanadas and really making a go out of it, and also confronting the employer too and being systematic, the things that you need to do, talking to workers and everything. But one of the cool things was that they used former workers, right? Especially in an economy where there's lots of high turnover, the idea of using former workers as a solid base of organizers, I think is really innovative, right? And so to me, I think it's also kind of an interesting way to think about how do we organize now and in this moment. And then, I mean, the other thing is true. It's a lot of what people's issues are is around basic respect and dignity. And sometimes that falls within the law and sometimes that doesn't fall within the law. Right. But I mean, I think it goes back to this culture, this idea that, we forget. I mean, the unfortunate reality is for a lot of people, they spend most of their time, waking time at work, not at other things. So the idea of work not being important, I deal with a lot of people who come to our office, and the first time when they come to our center, you're dealing with people having breakdowns and because they had nowhere else to vent the issues they face, like the level of harassment or the level of belittlement by their employers, right? And that we forget that kind of toll that it takes on us. So I think the idea of uh, of 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 building a movement that is that collective expression of that anger of all of those things that that workers feel inside is really important, right? In whatever mode that can take, I think it's a start, right? And if we look at historically, before you had any great unionization waves, like the CIO during the Depression, it was always led, beforehand by other efforts, early efforts by the industrial workers of the world, right? In the West Coast or in Chicago, or the Knights of Labor, the Temples of Labor, where these were sort of community labor unions, right? So I think, it's we just have to do it and we have to try, right? I think we're in a moment where we just have to try and we're gonna learn.
Yeah. I just wanted to mention one of my favorite stories about like going back in time in the Depression era when they were organizing. They would get on a soapbox and yell, I've been robbed, I've been robbed, I've been robbed. And then people would come over and they would be like, I've been robbed by the capitalist workers. And everybody would laugh. And just like seeing that kind of like organizing, just like, setting a soapbox up in the middle of the street and like, most of the people that you're living with in an industrial town during the Great Depression were also workers who've been robbed or been laid off and stuff like that, versus now, like with like the service industry, and other industries where most of us work in the West. Um, it's a separate kind of condition that we can reach out to you the same way, but it's not going on a soapbox anymore. So on that note, we do have a quick video that we had on health and safety, workers' rights in Amazon. So I just wanted to show that, and then we can maybe discuss about this interesting program that Amazon launched, I think, last year in response to their Amazon. So I just wanted to show that, and injuries that happen. We can maybe discuss about this interesting program that Amazon launched. Oh my God. I was like, is that my voice? Yeah.
Before we play the video, there is a very fun
I was like,
newer
is that my
story
voice?
like that about what
Yeah.
about what the ALU guy did. So like Chris Smalls there is a very fun. He's the president of the newer story like that about what.
Yeah.
And one of the things he did was create posters of all the union busters who were hired by Amazon, and then tell everybody you got to go catch them all. So.
Gotta love a nerd.
Yeah, we're good for the video.
Were hired by Amazon, and then tell everybody.
Amazon's rolling out a new wellness program to keep workers moving and make sure they don't get injured.
Our goal here is obviously to prevent, or wait,
We're good for the video.
Our goal is to prevent as many injuries as possible, and obviously one injury
Amazon's
is too many.
rolling out a new
So if
wellness
we didn't have
program
working
to keep
well,
workers moving
it's
and
thought
make
that
sure
our
they don't
progr-
get
our-
injured.
Our injuries would definitely increase, but one injury is always too many.
A recent report claims Amazon workers get hurt at an 80% higher rate than other workers in the industry. So now they've implemented a program that will make sure they're moving even a little bit every hour. We visited this Amazon location on Tropicana where people were doing some warm-ups during their shift.
We want to do them to keep them warm up so that way it reduces their risk of injury. Obviously, it's beneficial for warm-up to do before activity, whether that's at work or at home. So we definitely like to implement that here at Amazon and have them go through those warm-ups.
The program also offers mental health and nutrition guidance as well as COVID-19 safety measures.
Okay, so that's like a favorite video of mine, particularly because they had an 80% higher injury rate than warehouses, and their response was doing static stretching, which as like a former athlete, not really that good to prevent injuries. And then also offering a nutrition program, which is also very blatantly like not caring about your workers at all. So does anyone have a particular response to this? Mustafa, I see you getting the mic ready.
Well, I mean, I definitely have a particular response because, Amazon, these videos are so common and these sort of so Amazon also, like every shift you'll be told, we'll do safety stretches before every shift all together as a team. And people go around, we're safety obsessed. Don't move this way. You're supposed to move a box that way. And, there's this huge obsession. And then even in Montreal, the statistics are the same. There was something out of less than 800 employees were injured in between 2020 and 2021. And so much of it is like, they tell you that we care about your safety, we care about you, but you still have to make 300 to 400 items per hour. You're literally moving a box upwards to 20 kilos every 6 to 9 seconds. And that is never changing at Amazon. So it doesn't matter how, how well you move or how well you eat. The nutrition stuff it's laughable, right? Like Amazon in the US, there's a great book by a journalist who also worked at Amazon. And she talked about, so one of the things Amazon does, and she worked in the Appalachians, which has a huge opium crisis, right? And but one of the biggest employers in the Appalachians also is Amazon, right? And so because of all of the injury rates, and they have this thing called AmCare. They have, so you talk to an AmCare specialist, or there's an AmCare specialist at your floor, and then one of the things that they do in the U.S., they don't do it here, is like, and she talked about it, she's like, it's wild. It's not like okay, you have all of these high rates of injuries. You have people who have repetitive strains, repetitive injuries, which are really hard to win your health and safety claims. Is one, reduce the work rates, hire more people, or D, what Amazon did, put painkillers in a vending machine for free for workers to take. And so that's what they do in the US. Here, we have a free coffee machine and energy drinks disposable in the vending machine next to our safety equipment to keep you going, right? Because what Amazon as a specialist is, and because every warehouse is a lab, right? It's a laboratory. It's not just a warehouse, it's a laboratory, right? And so to become the most efficient workplace and eventually to be automated, right? So you're actually, in a way, there was a leaked pamphlet that the Amazon workers were considered industrial athletes, right? Almost like robots. Like you can't put robots in the place of humans in warehouses, because there's a very simple problem for robots. They can't, they can do this or they can do that, but they can't play Tetris, right? So they can't take a whole bunch of different bags and then put them in one big bag, right? It's too complicated for a robot. So it's very hard to automate a warehouse. But Amazon is learning through its workers, right? And that's why we're tracked all of the time, right? And you're literally, when I mean tracked all of the time, it's that every warehouse is rigged with artificial intelligence cameras that follow all of the workers and analyze our movements every 6 minutes. And then on top of that, you're connected to a device that tells you what to do, that tracks when you're off task or you put the wrong item in the wrong bag, or so all of that is monitored in real time and then combined. And then you're watched by your supervisors, the supervisors are watched by their supervisors, and up the chain it goes, right? So there's all of this stress and all of this pressure, which creates all of these injuries. And then to say is like, we care about your mental health or your nutrition. One of the things Amazon does is they have these, what they call, they're so expert and maniacal in terms of how to drain people of every last drop of their ability, is that Amazon created what's called super cycles. So people don't work like normal people. So it's not like in 5 days a week, 7 hours a day. People work 4 days a week at 10.5 hours a day. And then not including another break. And then where warehouses are, they're not exactly located in the middle of the city. It's in Dorval, Coteau de Lac, Lachine. So we're talking about people being on the job, anywhere between 12 and 14 hours a day with travel. People are pushed to the limits in all of these ways. But Amazon doesn't. Again, it's kind of laughable when they say we care about your health and safety. They even have a health and safety committee. You're lucky if people don't, there's like memes. There's a whole meme Facebook culture of Amazon workers, actually. And one of them was like, it's pretty funny. It's a Nicolas Cage one, right? And it's like, day shift Amazon worker, that you feel good, refreshed, you go into work, like night shift. I was on the night shift. It's like, and the first thing is like, hope no one dies tonight. And so there's this whole culture where people they know that they're being drained to the max, and that's why the turnover is so abysmally high, is that people, but then they make it, then they turn around, well, it's ergonomic. We even have ergonomic pads, just better than some warehouses, granted, but it's the fact that you're moving 400 items an hour for 10 hours a day.
With sometimes mandatory overtime.
And mandatory overtime on the 5th day during peak season, right? So workers are being worked 50 to over 50 hours a week doing this kind of labor.
Definitely draining. And on your note about the location of Amazon warehouses, I think it's very interesting how they locate them in areas where there's a lot of space, but it's right outside the city. And especially thinking of the workers that go there and travel far, or the workers who most of your friends work in that town and you live in that town and you're working at that Amazon facility now. it's definitely interesting because it's like trying to get those consumers there as quick as possible, like the items to the consumers, but it's also like so much travel time, and like to be at a workplace for 10 hours a day seems like it's particularly draining. So on that note of health and safety, we're gonna move to track, which is a different type of health and safety, but specifically when Concordia came out with their new plan to open up fully in person for the winter. I know you guys organized with the CSU to sign an open letter in response to that. How did your track membership respond particularly? And what were your tactics in like trying to get the best possible outcome?
So with that, like, we have to go back to the pandemic ruining everything first, because it was a lot harder to organize properly with that. But what had happened was we were like expecting Concordia to be sane about going back into class as fast as possible, and then they weren't. So we were basically like, okay, well, we need to do something about this. Obviously, we have members who like might not be comfortable coming back in, or are just straight up not prepared to come back in, or are not even in the country because of the previous semester. So we organized alongside CSU to sign an open letter, and we had one of our own. We also surveyed our own membership to see like, okay, well, do you want us to get masks? Do you want us to say something about Concordia? And we bought masks that were like more protective than these, and distributed them for free, and then tried to get Concordia to like maybe think of an actual plan as opposed to being like, everyone's going back in this semester, the departments can do whatever they want. And that's kind of like, unfortunately, we didn't get further than that, but I mean, it goes into a larger problem of health and safety. Like, one of the weird things about TAs and RAs is that we all work in very different contexts. Like, you're not going to be in the same level of danger if you're like a history research assistant versus an engineering one, perhaps, who's working with dangerous chemicals in a lab and whose professor has like basically abandoned ship and is just like, I'm gonna work remotely, have fun in the lab. But like there's different things like that, and like this goes back to the pandemic putting us all online and us not being prepared for being online. And like a lesson from there is that we as a union should have had a lot more structures put in place to help people know where to look and who to talk to about these kinds of issues. And we've been trying to build that back up for this year. But I mean, this does go back to kind of what Mustafa was talking about in terms of like the logic behind all businesses is to increase productivity. And like in Concordia's case, part of increasing productivity means do more research, do as much research as possible. Please do it without spending our money though. And another part of that is like how much money Concordia gets from international students. So that was a big issue for a lot of people this year, was like, okay, look, I had to leave the country, now I have to come back. I don't know if it's gonna be safe to go into class. And if I get sick and fail, then I'm like in trouble, like real trouble, as opposed to the fake trouble that most other people get, where it's like, oh yeah, I'll just go home and then re-register.
Yeah.
But like in our case, like the logic behind a lot of like business stuff is just to force people to the limit of whatever they're doing, and yeah, in our case, we're trying to like make sure people understand that you don't actually have to overwork. Like, you're not supposed to actually. It is actually kind of against the law. We have an agreement that says so. But yeah, I mean, like these are things that like, I mean, it goes back to like other things that, like, the reason Amazon is able to exploit workers is because like they're going to bank on you not necessarily knowing that you can't be forced to work as hard as possible. And like Concordia benefits enormously from that with the student body in terms of ignorance of labor rights and stuff, because like one of the things people that people come to us with is like, I don't know how to confront my professor about them asking me to do this job. And it's like, well, it's not necessarily your professor who has full control here. This is also a departmental issue, and the department is who disperses hours and stuff. So, and like we can represent them there. Like we have the right to go and go with them to talk about work, about things. So like, yeah, I mean, a lot of it comes down to making sure membership and everyone you work with knows that they're like not supposed to be forced to do so much. And then back on that is like membership being able to represent themselves. And then furthermore, it's like we do like exist in a capitalist society whose logic is push people to the limit, make as much money from them as possible, and then throw them away, which would be great to change. And the beginnings of that is like in the labor movement of laborers getting together to push back on that. And like at a political level, it's like you have to go further, because you don't want like one of the things that does happen is like, and I'm sure Mustafa could talk about this also, is like immigrant workers are used to bolster the ranks of labor against like laborers who are already here in this weird kind of like way that like fosters racism. But what the solution to that is to make sure that your immigrant workers are as well treated as the rest of us, so that it's not that's not a divide that can be had, or it's just like we all work together in the same spot. So yeah, that's what I gotta say.
Definitely. So, Sophie, it's a little different for you as a translator, because you're not working for one employer. But the Game Developers Association released data on independent contractors or self-employees, and 53% of them said that a crunch was expected at their workplace, and then 37% said they never received compensation for overtime. So do you want to give us a little bit more insight on like how workplace health and safety relates to self-employed workers, how like the tensions exist there, and how you can protect yourself by joining SATAC?
Yes, I can speak on that. So my personal work experience is not in the game industry, but it is definitely famous for having that crunch culture, right? Where it is expected that there will be parts of your work year where you're just expected to overwork yourself, and so are all your colleagues, and that's just how it is, right? That's a kind of, my understanding is that's a kind of broad industry culture problem. Where the self-employed bit comes in is that, as I was alluding to earlier, people who may be working in the same office every day for the same company alongside roughly the same people still get misclassified as independent contractors, and therefore in Quebec, for instance, don't have access to the same protections and the same recourses when they are being overworked in a way that threatens their health and safety, when they are doing overtime that their employer refuses to pay them for. And employers know that, right? That's not a coincidence. They know that while you have some recourse still, there's things to do with, for example, the Human Rights Commission in Quebec, with, on the civil law case, if as a self-employed worker, you feel you're being exploited or treated unfairly or harassed, etc. There are things that can be done, but those structures are harder to access for workers, and they're a bit less of a sure avenue to get something out of. Not that filing a complaint with the CNESST is a painless process by any stretch of the imagination, but by misclassifying employees as contractors or as self-employed, companies knowingly try to bypass these things. I have I don't know if we're going to talk about this later, but I just want to give some concrete examples of what it might look like if you're a misclassified freelancer or contractor. So for example, if your employer has control over your hiring and your firing, if they have control over where you work, right, your place of work and your schedule, if they can tell you exactly what tasks you're doing, in what order, with what methods, using what tools. Also, if they can take on disciplinary action against you. These are all very good signs that regardless of what your employer says, regardless of whether they claim you're self-employed, whether they claim you're a contractor or freelancer, that most likely, in the eyes of the law, you may actually be an employee, and your employer is lying. They are lying to you, and they are lying more broadly about their business practices and their employment practices. Going back to crunch, going back to unpaid overtime, a lot of the time, the first sort of logical step in those cases is to get people to see, like, okay, you're actually an employee. Your employer won't recognize this, but you're an employee, and there are ways to prove it. It's a difficult case to make, though, and so in some cases, rather than trying to go the legal route and proving that you're actually an employee, you may go a different sort of direct action route, right? You may sort of, upon recognizing that your employer is exploiting you in ways that, if not illegal, are completely unacceptable to you, you may want to start talking to your coworkers, right, to your fellow independent contractors, to see about making some changes, to see about applying pressure. It's complicated, though, because again, some of the protections that an employee status would afford you, for example, a lot of it is to do with wages, with paid holidays, with paid vacation, but some of it is also to do with termination, right? You are, in some ways, quite a bit more vulnerable as a contractor than as an employee to wrongful termination, if not according to the law, according to basic ethics, right? So it's tricky. In the more long term, things like that are why it's good to look at ways to change the law, right? To include independent contractors in those protections in a way that makes sense based on the way that we work and where we work and with whom we work. Yeah.
Thank you. So we have about 30 minutes left, so we're going to jump into a quick Q&A session. There's 2 questions that were already in the Q&A section on Zoom, but if you guys have any questions in the crowd, please ask them. So the first one is by Lucy, and she said, "Great panel all. What are some ways we can effectively build solidarity across all kinds of workers that we are, employees, contractors, gig workers, freelancers? Sometimes it feels like our fight are all so disparate when, of course, we are ultimately striving towards the same goals." So does anyone have a response?
I don't, not right now. I have to think about it for a bit.
Jonathan?
I mean, so like, here's one of the funny things about being in a legally certified union is that there are a lot of limits to what you're allowed to do, legally speaking. But unions also provide I'm gonna say, like, more democratic than the government way of doing things. Your members are allowed to ask the union to take certain positions, and those positions can be brought forward at even larger gatherings. Like TRAC is part of a very large union, and that union can take certain positions on things and probably has political power to push it. But other than that, there's also the fact that unions are like large social organizations. So you can actually use your connections within the union to push for not representation, but like to push certain projects on certain social issues and make that part of a larger thing. Like that's one of the ways we could probably deal with climate change properly, is having more unions have a political line on that. And I think there is projects working at the higher level for that. But like, I guess it is a hard thing, and it is something that like we experienced in SATAC a bit too, where it's like you're trying to organize across a large project of disparate struggles, especially with freelancers. But these things are like, these are all concentrated issues, and there are like community organizations that are specific to other issues, and you can pair with those through a union. Like, I mean, a lot of these places do need like volunteer work and stuff, and to make your union participate in those, you can pass a motion at general assemblies to ask for it, and ask for those ask for participation in those other social struggles. And like, yeah, they are all connected. Like, one of the things that that is a big deal nowadays, it's always been a big deal, but it's worse now, is like housing and stuff. And like, there's the housing committees that exist right now. There's RCLALC, it's RCLA. LCQ. I'm really bad at remembering.
It's two C's.
It's two C's?
Yeah.
Okay. Anyway, you can look them up, but they also have another organization like that fights alongside them called FRAPRU. So the first one's for renters. It's renters' rights fighting, but the other one's for social housing. And obviously those two are very closely linked together. And they're of course closely linked together for us as laborers, because most of us are renters. So if you want to get into like how things are tied to each other, that's like one way to look at it, is to tie in these other organizations to your specific struggles as part of your labor rights. Like, this is how you figure out how much you actually need to be paid for minimum wage. And like, that's one other thing where it's like, minimum wage is set by the government, but in your workplace, if you have a union, you can be like, no, minimum wage here is much higher, sorry.
Does anyone else want to jump in?
I mean, yeah, I agree. Like, that there has to be, it's a challenge. It's not easy. How do you bring all of these people who are, who do different kinds of jobs or different types of work, and how do you bring all of that together, and what's the union around it? But I think a lot of it is even people's, once they tell their stories, there's a sort of a commonality. There's a common experience that takes place, and even if there's varieties of, or differences in terms of the types or levels of exploitation, I'll give one example from the center, which was, almost over 10 years ago. We were working with a group of immigrant workers from Lemoore Textile Factory, a sock factory that employed 500 immigrant workers, and it was shutting down. It was part of this mass wave of, the ending of the textile and garment industry in Montreal. And so we had a campaign to demand real severance, because they had a yellow union, and we brought together almost 100 workers, different communities, different ethnic groups, and it was challenged at first, but their big issue was that everybody deserved a severance, right? And it wasn't just trying to build an alliance between them, but we went to seek support from the unions, and we went to the CSN Conseil Central, and it was a really funny moment. And a lot of the people that we were working with, this was at the time of reasonable accommodation, right? And one of the first big debates, and sort of unfortunately the festival of Islamophobia, and that, whether the hijab should be in public, workplaces, and a lot of these women were from Bangladesh, and they were wearing the hijab, and CSN had actually taken a pretty bad position at the time of reasonable accommodation, right? Where they were actually pro the banning of the hijab inside public workplaces, right? They changed their position and they got really better, but this was 2008. And so when we went, we were like, oh my God, this is going to be such a nightmare. And, because all of the people who were speaking were Muslim women wearing the hijab, and women were speaking about their experiences about being locked into the factory overnight. And we're not talking about in Bangladesh, we're talking about in Chabanel, right? That if you finished your quotas and there was no more work, you weren't allowed to leave because the doors were locked. And so literally, didn't matter if a fire or whatever took place, you were trapped. It's actually one of the main reasons. It's one of the events that led to International Women's Day, right? Was a fire in a garment mill in the US, in New York, right? And we're talking about 100 years later. And workers were shocked to hear this, that, we were at the Conseil Central, the Montreal Regional Council for CSN, and people gave them a standing ovation. And what was even, workers were crying and in support of these textile workers. And even behind them was like the Hurley, I think they're on strike now, the casino security guards that were behind them, that were on strike, that were also like in full support. And these were two worlds apart. But once people told their lived realities, a lot of that backward ideas or thinking, you have a chance to make a dent at those ideas and bring people together. So I think it's never easy, but it's a process, right, of how we bring people together, because it is so important. Because the whole point is that we're always divided, right? And that's what they want, and that's what they aim for. And it's always been it's always been a struggle, but it's the most important one, right? And we see this now, right? How do we bring different groups of people together to challenge those bigger things?
Definitely. I think highlighting the fact that we're all workers is one great step to building solidarity. Did you have something to add, Sophie?
No, I'm just thankful to Mustafa for like restoring my faith in the labor movement.
Yeah,
and, like,
definitely.
Yeah, so thank you for that. No, yeah, nothing to add.
Okay, so Ali has a question. What do you think is the first step to creating a safe and empowering space for organizing?
You can go first because I've talked a lot.
Right, so I mean, Jonathan and I organize together sometimes, so he knows that this is one of my things that I always bring up. I think accessibility is a big area where the labor movement as a whole has a lot of room to improve. And when I say accessibility, I mean accessibility to people who have kids, right? To parents and guardians of children. I mean accessibility for disabled or chronically ill or neurodivergent folks. I mean accessibility to people for whom to people whose first or second language is not the language being spoken by most of the members in the union. I think that, and I know we were maybe going to talk about the pandemic at another point, but I think that the pandemic has highlighted how some organizing spaces were very, very ill-equipped to protect the safety of particularly chronically ill and disabled people in the context of a mass disabling event that was posing some just increased challenges to those groups. This is very close to home for me. I'm chronically ill. I joined SATAC at a time a few months into the pandemic where, for me, the only way that I could organize was online. And I was so just thankful and amazed, right, to be walking into this organizing space that even before the pandemic, because it works with a lot of workers that are quite isolated with each other, because it is a union that aims to work with freelancers across Quebec, was already doing virtual organizing. And I think that there's just a lot we can do along those lines, whether that be, just on a basic level, like making hybrid meetings just a regular thing, and taking into account the need for childcare at organizing events. And some groups are doing great in some of those areas, and some are doing great in others. I think a lot of the time it kind of has to do with who is most active in the union and whose accessibility needs are therefore more visible. I think accessibility is about just constantly competing needs, right? And so there's no just spectrum of least accessible to most accessible that you can just move along until you get to the good bit, right? You have to constantly reassess and see what people's needs are. And I, as someone who definitely benefited from being able to organize online, I also the flip side of that is that for a lot of people, organizing online is completely inaccessible, right? You need to have the required tech, or at least have access to it on a reliable kind of basis. You have to have access to a reliable internet connection. So, online doesn't necessarily mean more accessible, but I think those are all things that we can do better as labor movements. Just rereading the question to make sure I'm not. Oh, that's not the question. I was like, oh my God, compensating leave. Oh no.
The question was, what do you think is the first step to creating a safe and empowering space for organizing?
Yeah. So I think accessibility, which it's 1,000 tiny first steps, right? And it's something you have to keep working at. I think that's a big one and a good one. I think it's important in general to sort of work against the clique mentality that can sometimes develop in some organizing contexts. I think a lot of us end up organizing with our friends, and that feels great. And you have kind of a shorthand sometimes with people, and that can be very, very helpful in a lot of ways. But if we want our movements to be welcoming for people and to be safe for people to partake in, we have to sort of remain conscious of those informal structures. I'm looking at Jonathan because we had a meeting recently where we were discussing an article by Joe Freeman that Jonathan recommended, titled "The Tyranny of Structurelessness," which I recommend to everybody. It's available online. It's incredible, and it outlines a lot of the issues with the way that some of our movements aim to be structureless or horizontal in ways that sometimes exclude people, or sometimes create these sort of elites, right? And people within the movement who have a lot of power, have a lot of say, and which makes it very, very hard for outsiders to permeate the movement, which tends to exclude people. Along the lines of race and gender and class and disability and all sorts of other things. So I think those are good things to think about. They're big, challenging questions, but I think they're important to keep in mind when it comes to making our movements safe and welcoming for people.
Did you want to add something, Jonathan?
Yeah, well, because one thing that has happened in track is or that I've learned through being a vice president of track, is that the organizers or lead organizers, I don't like calling myself that, even though I'm titled vice president, but the one of the things that you have to do as the executive committee in my case, or if you're starting out or something and need more people involved, is to actually check in with the membership, is to talk to the people who are active to find out how they're doing, or if they have any barriers. In TRAC's case, I mean, we have people for whom English isn't their first language, but there are formal structures that require some knowledge of English, and if you don't know, you're just going to sit there and watch other people work and be like, I'm not sure what's going on, but I think something happened. Or in some other cases where it's it is an accessibility issue in terms of disability and stuff, it's the people who have disabilities or something might not want to speak up about it unless they're asked, because they're going to be like, I don't want to get in the way of things, or just people haven't addressed this before or whatever. And it's important to check in with everyone, because for one thing, you might not know, I'm able-bodied as far as I know, but when talking to some people, it's yeah, by the way, this thing that we do normally is a huge problem for me. I can't participate if we keep doing this. And so I think that's one thing, if you're already in a formalized organization, or if you're starting out and you have other people helping, checking in with the rest of the people who are in there is a really important concrete step to do, because it will inform you on how to organize better and prevent things from just suddenly falling apart for reasons you don't understand.
Really quickly, because we're running out of time, is there any questions in the crowd? Oh, I'm gonna come over. I think you raised your hand first.
Is this working? Yeah. I just want to ask a quick question. I was wondering that how do immigrant workers factor in here? Because I would imagine that yes, we can organize and yes, we can mobilize support, but I think that, including myself, because I'm an international student, I sometimes think that when I am going in for meetings in general, not just like for unions about workers, but in general, I sometimes feel that even though I'm sitting with people here and we are all a union, I feel like my experiences are way different just because how, standing up to an employer works back home and it ends poorly generally. So I was wondering that, would you say it's an irrational fear when an immigrant worker feels that, oh, at the end of the day, these guys are permanent residents and they live here and they know their rights, so they know what to do in case some legal issue arises, or in case they lose their jobs, they can depend on the government. But whereas me as a foreign student, I cannot if that happens. So do you think that it's an irrational fears if I feel that even though I'm in the union, my experience is different, so I am less protected, if I may say? Do you think it's irrational, or would you say that it is a legitimate fear and it's not from a place of misinformation? And how do you think what can we say to people who might feel that way?
That was an amazing question. I know, Mustafa, you work with a lot of immigrants, so if you want to start off.
Obviously, for international students, I mean, for immigrants more broadly, I think obviously people have their, in terms of where they come from and the history of unions. And I think in both ways, right? There's a sort of a history of or a context of repression where, unions are outlawed or unions are penalized or being active in a union is punished. But then there's also a history of a lot of political organizing and a history of where people, did incredible things for workers' rights as well, right? And so it's, to me, it's not irrational, right? And also there's the other structural barriers, right? If you feel that you can't move between jobs as easily, even if you have an open work permit. But if you're an international student, you're so restricted in terms of how many hours you can work. You feel this restriction because you're temporary here. You're already paying exuberant amounts of fees. And, there's already there's one restriction after the other placed on people to make them feel vulnerable, right? To make them structurally vulnerable, right? And that is part of the big barrier. Now you're beginning to see pockets of international students beginning to organize, but a lot through these private colleges that really ripped people off and took great advantage. But they're organizing. There was a sit-in in Scarborough actually in front of a private college by more than 100 international students, right? And you had a demonstration here of 300 students. There was 3 colleges that were partially publicly funded that operated between here and in Chandigarh in India, and they were actually they went bankrupt. The schools went bankrupt, partially publicly funded by here, and students were left without status. They paid their fees, no refund, no ability to graduate, no ability then to apply for the PEC. So their whole lives were in complete ruin, right? So obviously, I don't think it's an irrational fear at all, right? And but that doesn't mean your rights still don't apply, right? And that's what we try to tell people all the time, is that their rights still apply. And I think, and it even goes back to the older question, right? It's which is creating a sort of a safe place and a safe organizing space where people can come together to be able to defend their rights, right? Because obviously you upholding your basic rights doesn't impact one's immigration status or doesn't impact their application or their file. To be honest, is there a consequence maybe at that immediate job or employer? Yes, there always is, right? But at the same time, I think the more people see other immigrants defending and standing up for their rights, has an impact on them, right? That this is irrational, that I do have the same rights as everyone else, right? But there's other things that keep those barriers there. Absolutely. Immigration status, work permits, all of those things are very different than what other workers have to face, right? And so, but at the end of the day, can you go to the Sinest? Absolutely, right? Should one be participating in the union? Absolutely, right? Even if more so because of the way the vulnerability. And I think part of the labor movement now, and a big question is that how do we include those demands into the labor movement, right? So questions about immigration, all of these things that create barriers to immigrants participating, because more and more this is going to become an issue, right? So if you look at Quebec, it's clearly like what international students are for, right? It's like you're temporary, you're made to pay exuberant fees, but then you're considered cheap labor too, right? So part of the program to get more workers is to lower international student fees in the regions, right? So if you go to a university in Sherbrooke or in Chicoutimi, you'll be paying less tuition than you would be in Montreal. And that's Legault's response to get people out into the regions and to move immigrants around, right? And so, I mean, it happens, and now they can bring in, 30% of companies with labor shortage, companies with labor shortage in sectors where there's a labor shortage could bring in 30% of their workforce as temporary foreign workers on closed work permits. So there's going to be these issues are becoming really big issues in Quebec. And it's funny because it's at the same time the most anti-immigrant Quebec government we have, right? And he just took this playbook straight from Jason Kenney, right? It's like you bring in temporary workers. It doesn't, you say, well, I reduced permanent immigration to the base, but then at the same time, you've raised temporary migration to exceed that. So, I mean, it's not irrational, right? And I think it's about making that space for immigrants to feel that they're part of the labor movement.
I also have something to add on that. So, I mean, inside of Track, we also started an international student committee, because, like, yeah, one of the things that the pandemic super highlighted for everybody was like how differently local students like me are treated from people who are not local students, and like. This also goes back to like how I was laid off, because when I was laid off, I was group laid off with 3 other people. One of them was a Quebec resident, but 2 of them were international workers or foreign workers. And like, I didn't really know much about the visa situation, about how anything worked. But when I was let go, it was like, we were all let go in a meeting, basically. Like, our manager was just like, okay, well, I have to say bye to all 4 of you, sorry. And one of my foreign worker coworkers was like, "What about my health care?" And I was like, "Wait, what? I thought we did that in this country." And then like I went down a spiral, like looking up how all of this works. And I mean, in Track, I mean, I think like one of the things is like your fear is like rational, like Mustafa said, but I think part of it is just like ignorance on the part of local people, where it's just like, yeah, why are you so scared about organizing? It's like, well, these things matter to me. This other thing that you don't know about matters to me, and all of this. So one thing that we tried to do in Track to address this issue was to create a space where international students could talk about their specific issues and bring it to the forefront, because yeah, it's not going to be top of mind for somebody like me, because it's not one of my material concerns. But as part of the union, you can create a space in which you can say, like, this is a concern, it's real serious actually, and we all need you guys to take care of it. And I mean, that's part of what like unions are for, is to be like, this is a thing that our workers care about. And what you can actually get done in bargaining periods, if you're like a legally certified union, is to be like, in the contract, this problem right here, this has to be addressed in this specific way. Yeah, I mean, that's my advice on like legally certified unions.
Is it working? Okay. Yeah. So we only have 5 minutes left, so we're gonna wrap it up with that question. If you guys want to go around and highlight any campaigns that are going on in your organization, any information from your organization for the people here to volunteer at or to shout out, whatever you want to do. Jonathan, I guess you can go first.
Yeah, I mean, currently, there's most of track stuff is internal, so if you're not a member, there's not much you can do, but we will probably be doing a lot more social events now that the pandemic is over. But I mean, since we're in person, we'll be around and probably doing more things socially and in person, which like one of the things I know that the new exec coming in is all about is just labor stuff and talking about labor things. So if we have events, that's one way to learn more about like organizing, not necessarily inside of Concordia, but maybe at the workplace, like you work outside of Concordia at your job. If you're in track, I mean, I think getting involved in like talking to the exec and be like, this is a problem for me and other people is definitely a good thing to do.
For people to get involved at the Immigrant Workers Center, I mean, obviously, they can check out our website, iwc-cti.ca, or just Google the Immigrant Workers Center. And I mean, for us, the campaigns that are, we focus on, we have our legal clinic every week, twice a week, around basic labor standards as well as immigration issues. We do outreach, and we've been focusing on campaigns, not just around Amazon, but also Dollarama, and the exploitation of the warehouse workers who are all temp agency workers and refugee claimants. And we might be having an action before the 11th of June, before their annual general meeting. And obviously, so people should, at least on Facebook, you'll see if there's any information about that coming up, if we will be doing a demonstration. And then also around our campaigns around Work with Dignity, which is the work of our women's committee. And so, yeah, there's a lot that's happening. And also there'll be, on July 30th, we'll be doing a very large public barbecue out in Jerry Park. So we'll pass that information on. So, and then in terms of the Amazon related stuff, people should check out Mawu on Facebook. I know they're in the midst of the campaign, so there isn't solidarity per se. They're still really in the midst of the organizing, but they have gone public. But we'll see how that goes once the cards go in and what kind of solidarity that is needed. But they do have a public Facebook page. And if you know anyone who works at Amazon, because there are quite a bit of Concordia students who work at Amazon actually, because it's a part-time job, and there's actually a few. So if you know anybody who works at Amazon, there is a union campaign that they should be involved in.
Yeah. Okay, I'm good, sorry. Had a little mic paranoia there. So SATAC has a website that you can check out, sattaq.xyz. A really good thing to do if you want to kind of stay on top of the events that we've got planned is to sign up for our newsletter on the website, especially with the nice weather. We're organizing more in-person kind of outdoor social events. Those are usually open to everybody, including those who aren't members. I'm sorry. We also have monthly online co-working sessions. Again, those are open to everyone. No need to be a member. It's a really good way to sort of counter that isolation that you might be feeling working from home. Students or workers, by the way, it's cool if you want to join us to do some of your coursework or whatever it is, it's a good way to, informally meet some people involved with SATAC, ask us any questions you might have. In terms of campaigns, two of SATAC's big campaigns right now are SWIM, which is the sex work industrial movement, which was started by some of my fellow organizers working in the sex trade. They're doing some really, really important work around organizing sex workers who are kind of doubly marginalized, both as freelancers and because their work is criminalized. I'm very involved in a translators campaign, so a campaign by and for freelance translators. If you have any questions about any of those campaigns, or if you are interested in joining SATAC, again, the website has a form where you can reach us, sattaq.xyz. The last thing is that I will say is that SATAC does what we call Reclaim Your Pay campaigns, and those campaigns aim to address wage theft. So if you're a freelancer, if you're a self-employed worker, an independent contractor, whatever, and you have an invoice that a client or an employer won't pay, you can reach out to us and we can strategize together to try and get you paid through avenues that you're comfortable with and that are likely to get results. Again, you can reach out to us about that through the website. Full disclosure, that newsletter I mentioned earlier, I write it. So if you sign up, you'll be getting more of this in your inbox. So yeah, that's it. It's my spiel.
I think. Hey, thanks for joining everyone on the Zoom and the crowd. Yeah, you can reach them at the IWC, Track Union, and SATAC. I think we're it.
Hello. Thank you so much to the guest speakers and the organizers for this lively conversation. And thank you for the audience members online and in person. Just a reminder that this discussion will be available as a recording on our YouTube later today. And that's it. We're going to close up the webinar. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.